Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery.
Sure is. You can say that again. You can sing that again. Have you ever been afraid that you have said the wrong thing or asked the wrong question? All right, I see some heads nodding, so it's not just me. Except Patty, of course. I see you going, nah, not me, not me. Now, instead of speaking your mind, maybe you stayed silent, perhaps out of fear of being misunderstood, or you bit your tongue because you were worried that, maybe you were worried you would offend someone, or worried that you'd be taken out of context. Someone would think you're ill-informed, or that you're prejudiced based on the question that you're asking, no matter if it's coming right, out of your heart. I recall some instances sitting silently in these moments where there's people all around. I've got this question, I've got this concern, there's this discussion going on, but I didn't have the self-confidence, or I didn't have the trust in the people I was with to be able to hear my heart or the authenticity of my question. And so I just stayed silent. As I've been following the legislation here in Oklahoma and across the country around all the anti-transgender bills and things, I have a lot of questions. And there are 123 bills right now being considered that would ban the rights of transgender people that just came out in 2023 in the last 2 months. 26 are in consideration here in Oklahoma. Now, in a democracy, if we're not informed, anything could happen, including grave injustice. But if we don't feel that we can ask questions, then it's hard to, ask questions and get thoughtful and non-judgmental answers. It can be hard to become informed. And so we end up just speaking in echo chambers of people who think like us because we don't know where and how we can ask questions. In the last 6 months, I've had 3 different grandparents come talk to me and ask me, explain to me that they either have a grandchild who's transgender or they have a grandchild who's dating someone who's transgender, and they're just trying to figure it out. So different from how it was when they grew up. And I'm really glad that they felt that they could come talk to me and know that I would be open to whatever concerns, questions that they had in a non-judgmental way. For example, I know that there are people who are questioning, is it really fair for someone who's born biologically male to compete in girls' sports? It's a reasonable question. It's something that bears discussion. And yet in some circles it can feel like, no, if you even raise it as a question, you're not either on board or against, then there's something wrong with you, and people just stay silent. I know there are people silently thinking being an adolescent is confusing enough. With all the questions that arise in that time of our lives about our identity, our sexuality, our gender, and wondering, is the current openness around transgender acceptance making it better or worse for teenagers? But it might feel scandalous in some circles to even admit one has the question in their mind. Not to mention questions such as, is it really okay to allow surgery and hormone treatments to change or affirm someone's gender who's a teenager? You might not feel altogether comfortable with the idea of drag queen story hour for children. And even if you always have prided yourself on being open-minded or liberal, and you wonder now if you're going to lose your progressive bona fides, if you admit what you're really thinking and worrying about and questioning, it's not a good feeling. And these days, even in places like All Souls, and other Unitarian Universalist congregations across the country that used to be places where you could always come and ask any question and not fear that you'll be berated or proselytized to. Now some people are not so sure if they can ask a question on certain issues like gender identity type issues, if they'll be welcome. And you may have come here because you were either kicked out of a church or made to feel unwelcome in a church because you had questions about God and the Bible, and you were really glad to find finally a place where you could come that welcomed your questions and you didn't get proselytized to, but people would take you seriously and make you feel welcome. But now, sometimes you might wonder, in the current political environment, is the same true with regard to other questions on social issues? And if you cannot ask the questions here, then where? Before the word woke became highly politicized, it simply meant being aware and attentive to important social issues, especially around human rights and equality. And a few years ago, someone asked, is there room among the woke for the waking? In other words, within communities that care about progressive social issues, is there a place for people who are interested in learning who may not have already learned or figured out or decided on certain things? Or does someone have to come into the community already learned on what are the appropriate words and pronouns and conventions with regard to all the various social issues that are sort of in flux right now in our culture? Because if that's the case, then where are people supposed to go first to become enlightened on all this stuff before they enter into a community, a church community or something else? If communities like ours aren't here for the very purpose of helping welcome people and introduce them and create a context where those conversations can happen. And is there room in such communities for honest conversation and a diversity of opinions? We know there's room for diversity of opinions about belief and religion, but how about other issues? Or does everyone have to think alike to belong? That's a big question. So this is a long way of saying that I feel it is absolutely essential and important that All Souls here in Tulsa is a place where we don't have to think alike to belong. A person can come, thank you, you can clap for that, I appreciate that. A person can come wherever you are on your spiritual journey, on your personal journey, on your justice journey, on your journey around sexual identity, racial identity, gender identity, and feel welcome. But in order for this both to be a place where we can have different beliefs and opinions and also be welcoming to one another, we need to start from a place of loving kindness. Because it's hard. It's hard to be in community where you have some folks who may be coming from backgrounds and situations where they've been put down or told they're wrong and other things, and then come into a community that you understand is welcoming, and then have other people in the community who are still asking some questions and not so sure and trying to figure it out. It's hard on both sides. So we begin with loving kindness, or what we call here, love beyond belief. So I want to note for anyone who doesn't know me very well that I identify as cisgendered, right? That means I identify with the gender I was ascribed at birth, which is male. But today I want to tell you two stories about how I learned love beyond belief for transgender people. The first one was when I was 10 years old. It was 1978. And it was in church one Sunday morning with my mom at the Unitarian church in Evanston, Illinois. A very tall woman came walking down the far aisle on the other side of the church, and my mom explained to me that in the most matter-of-fact and loving way, Marlin, do you know that woman used to be a man? But her whole life, she always felt that she was in the wrong body and was really a woman. Recently, she began to live as a woman, my mom explained. Well, and I had lots of questions. Fortunately, my mom seemed to have a lot of answers. My mom explained that the woman was pursuing having surgery to become a woman, and what was required back then was for her to live as a woman for 1 year, make sure that she liked it and it was the right decision, and then she was would be eligible to have the surgery. She was married to a woman who married her when she was a man. And my mom explained that they planned to stay married as two women because they love each other. The way my mom talked about it, I could tell that she was genuinely happy for this person, that she had the freedom to be who she was. And at 10 years old, that made a deep impression on me. And my mom said that our minister and our church is very supportive, which is good, she said, because not everyone out there is. And that's how I first learned about transgender, although we didn't call it that back then. I learned about it just as a fact of life. And I remember it felt good to recognize that my church was a safe place for her and for her family. And it made me feel like the church is a safe place for me too. Because I knew that these are loving people who, no matter what happened in my life or what became of me, that they would accept me and they would still love me and they wouldn't cast me out or ridicule me. And I have to say that learning about this at age 10, it never caused me to question my own gender. But I imagine that if I were struggling with feelings like that, I would have known from that day on that I could talk to my mom or my minister if I was. And for those who are wondering, I don't think that exposing children to trans people or gay or lesbian people, for that matter, makes them confused about their own gender or their own sexuality. It certainly didn't have that impact on me or on my brother or on my own children or on so many of the other children I grew up with and who have grown up in this church. It's a scare tactic that politicians use to try to move forward their own political careers. And it ties into something deeply human, which is a fear of things that are different and a fear of change. So it's sort of intuitive to have a little sense like, oh yeah, maybe there's something wrong with this. And so it's very easy to manipulate people around these feelings and these issues. But keep in mind that transgender people have existed in every culture, every religion, every ethnic group throughout all of human history. It makes me think that it's just one of the many amazing diversities of nature and of life. And for the more theologically inclined, we could say it's part of God's glorious and awesome creation. By the way, there is some really interesting, provocative, and very thoughtful biblical scholarship around this issue of gender identity in the Bible. And I would point you to the Human Rights Campaign website, HRC website, which has a lot of information about the Bible and transgender issues. And our theme, as Shannon said earlier this month, is religious authority. And since a lot of people in Oklahoma and across the world use the Bible as their religious authority, if it's in the Bible, then it's either right or wrong. It sometimes can be really helpful to have some of this knowledge about what the Bible actually says in a positive way, according to theologians and historians about transgender people. And I'll give you my favorite Bible fact on this topic. According to the Bible, the very first convert to Christianity was an Ethiopian eunuch. Eunuchs have been part of society since ancient antiquity and are truly transgender or gender non-binary people. In fact, the first convert to Christianity in the Bible was transgender, non-binary. It's in the book of Acts, chapter 8. Look it up, verses 26 through 40, when Philip baptizes the eunuch as the first person to convert to Christianity, to become a Christian in the Bible, was both black and transgender. So let's just put that in there. My other story that I want to share, personal story that I want to share, is from a few years ago, and this one involves my dad. Some of you know my dad. We were talking about the awkwardness of stating your pronouns or asking someone else theirs. Keep in mind, my dad is 87 years old. He grew up in a whole different generation. He's a former college wrestler. He's 6'2", he's bald, bearded, has a belly. In other words, he looks a lot like this. Up until a few years ago, nobody would have ever asked him his pronouns. I think if you do a Google search under traditionally masculine macho men, my dad's picture will pop up in the results. All right, so you know who we're talking about here. So we were having this pronoun discussion, and it was a private conversation between father and son, who happen to both be cisgender, straight, white, and able-bodied. So we were being very honest about our first reaction to the new pronoun convention that we're being asked to follow. And we both had stories of how awkward it can feel to announce your pronouns or ask someone else about theirs. And then my dad surprised me. This is what he said. Yeah, it was uncomfortable for me. And at first I resisted this whole new idea. I thought it was ridiculous, really, what was going on. But then I realized it only feels awkward for me for a few minutes in these situations. But for transgender people, so much of their life in public is uncomfortable and even scary. So I figured, I'm willing to be uncomfortable for a few minutes if it makes a trans person's life a little bit easier and makes them feel a little more welcome in a world where they often feel so left out and out of place. What's a few moments of discomfort for me in my life if it will make their life better? And with that simple philosophy, my dad changed my life forever. I realized that the least thing I can do, and the loving thing, is to share some of the discomfort of my transgender neighbors and friends by being gracious when it comes to pronouns. It's barely any sweat off my back, and yet for them, it makes a world of difference. But it's even bigger than that. We're living in a time and in a society where we're striving to be more equitable, less oppressive, more inclusive, to create a more perfect union, as we say. And a lot of things are changing, and whenever there's change like this, it's uncomfortable and it's confusing, and especially when there's no clear roadmap. And mistakes are always made, and there's overcorrections, and there's overreactions. But usually, in time, with the help of wise and loving people, things find their equilibrium and life goes on. So what can we do to be among the wise and the loving in this time? Let's be kind as the first principle. When in doubt, let's be kind and think about the other. Be willing to share the discomfort of people who are different from us, especially those of us who walk through the world feeling comfortable most of the time. If we're in a situation where we can stop and share some of that discomfort by speaking up for somebody else or doing something to help them to feel more welcome and not so alone, what a great gift that we can give by sharing the discomfort, and at work or at places like church, to share power with people who are different from ourselves. Make space for the cultures and the traditions of minorities within any group that we're in. Instead of focusing on how does this feel for me, try to think, what will this mean to them, the other person? And most importantly, be sure to talk with someone who, before you stake out a claim on a position with great strength, to talk to somebody who's lived in that situation. Because, I know you've heard this too. I've heard, white people talking about, well, African Americans, they say this, and it's like, well, have you ever actually asked an African American what their experience was, and like face to face, a human being? And a lot of times people are like, well, no, I watch TV and stuff, right? And it's the same with transgender issues. People have these strong positions that they're like staking a claim. And yet they've never really talked to a parent of a transgender child or to talk to a transgender teenager or adult. And so I really want to encourage all of us to listen to those, to folks before we get out there and start having too strong of an opinion about something. I will tell you, I'm not going to try to explain all my opinions on all the recent anti-transgender legislation that's out there right now, but I hope we're all paying attention, and I hope we'll all be really thoughtful, because it makes a difference. In a democracy, if we're not paying attention, awful things can happen, and usually politicians will pick on the weakest, most vulnerable people who have the least power over them in order to try to bolster their own power and their own campaign. So I just think it's so important. But I will say that all the 26 I've read in Oklahoma seem wrong-headed to me across the board. And I want to suggest that we work against any administration or politician who seeks to fuel their own rise to power by threatening the lives of transgender, genderqueer, or non-binary people. I find it incredible that the Oklahoma legislature has time to write and debate 26 bills policing transgender people, but cannot pass one law to regulate guns. Guns are the leading cause of death of children in Oklahoma, in the United States. The leading cause of death of children are guns. Death of children. But our politicians are hyper-focused on saving the children from drag queen story hour. If they really care about children, regulate the guns, not the queens. Yeah? Please. And this is personal for me because in the last 6 months, I have been asked to officiate 2 memorial services for 2 young transgender people who've died. One was 16 and likely an overdose. And the other one was 22 and was murdered. It's not easy to be transgender today. And anything that we can do to make life a little better for someone else is a blessing. So I hope that we can be a community that welcomes people's questions without judgment, and that we also welcome people's gender identities without judgment. For me, the promise of love beyond belief, courageous love, and all the things that we talk about here is to build a society where everyone can exist boldly and unapologetically in public, including fully authentic transgender, genderqueer, and non-binary people. It is a world in which gender is no longer policed. Not male gender, not female gender, which has been policed for a long time and is continuing to be policed, or the gender of anybody across the spectrum. In which trans people of color are safe and free. I don't know if you know, but of the 37 trans people who were murdered last year, 26 of them were persons of color. It's a huge epidemic. So a place where folks will be safe in public, safe at home, where trans people are not only tolerated, but cherished, loved, held, nurtured, adored, protected. A world in which no one has to look over their shoulder before holding hands with someone they love. And no one has to wonder if today's the day that hate will come with a clenched fist or an AR-15. Until everyone is thriving in a community that welcomes them. And our world is filled with communities grown in love and admiration and mutual respect, and where people are considered perfectly whole, even with bodies which may defy definition and defy standards. Let us embrace reality and embrace each other. Thank you. I love you.
Would be one, as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew.